Now that we've seen a couple of different styles of XSS attack, both reflected XSS and persistent XSS, I want to touch briefly on the mechanisms to defend against the risk. So firstly, and this goes back to the entire point of the previous module, always validate untrusted data. In the first example where I had the malicious search term, that is clearly not a legitimate thing to be searching for. So being explicit about what you want to allow on each input, and that means every point where untrusted data enters the system, that's critical. So having a whitelist of allowable or trusted data is an absolute must. Same again when it comes from an external service. So in that Whois example just before with the Harlem Shake, clearly when they were pulling Whois records, they weren't validating that the records were not malicious. The other really big thing about XSS, and this is really the core of defending against XSS, is encoding for the right context. The heart of the problem with XSS attacks is that untrusted data can execute on the page and change the behavior of that page. In the case where we ran the search, what we really should have been seeing is that entire XSS string appearing in the text that says you searched for and appearing in the search box itself. That is, of course, if it actually passes the validation I referred to in the previous point. But we should have seen it on the screen. We shouldn't have seen it rendered into the source code. Now it's important to get encoding right too, because we just saw two different contexts. So that is, it existed in an H2 heading tag, and we also saw it in the JavaScript context, so it was reflected inside a script tag. I talk extensively about context in my Hack Yourself First course, so that is absolutely critical if you're actually involved in building systems that need XSS protection. Another problem that made the attacks we saw before worse was the fact that sensitive cookies could be accessed by JavaScript. Now cookies have a paradigm called HTTP only, and when they're flagged as HTTP only, they can't be accessed by client script. They can still be sent back to the server and read by code that executes within the web framework, but they can't be accessed like we just saw with JavaScript. I show that in quite a bit of detail in the Ethical Hacking Session Hijacking course, and this again is another really fundamental security control. And finally, treat everything as suspicious. Trust no one. The Whois example in the video before was a perfect example of this. They probably thought it was quite reasonable to assume that DNS records wouldn't have cross-site scripting attack payloads. But the assumption was the problem. And the assumption they really needed was the assumption that everything is out to get you. Because when you work from that position and you treat everything as suspicious, you're far better prepared for the times when it actually does turn out to be malicious. Now that we've covered both some attacks and some defenses, there's just one more thing I want to look at with XSS, and that's some ways of finding it and then ways of evading some of the defenses that I've just spoken about.